Well, thank you. I want to talk about AIIB's financing of projects. A couple of years ago, a senior member of AIIB, as reported in the Financial Times, a reputable publication, said that the bank was open to funding projects in Myanmar's military junta, which is not something the Government of Canada supports. How is the government reconciling its position with membership in a development bank where senior members of the bank openly muse about funding projects in jurisdictions like Myanmar?
Thank you for that question. We're not aware of the IIB being open to new projects with the junta in Myanmar, and we would certainly, if it was the case, or if any project would have been brought to the board, we would have certainly.
Appreciate that answer. Let me give you some other examples that have actually happened. In 2020, a number of non-governmental organizations accused the AIIB of violating human rights and environmental standards in India when 103 families were forcibly moved to make way for a metro rail project funded by the AIIB. In the same year, similar allegations about a lack of environmental standards was made with respect to an AIIB project funded in Bangladesh, which was the Bola power plant, where a flood occurred and a number of workers died. A year later, the High Commissioner on Human Rights the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights stated that human rights have been violated in Indonesia's Mandalika tourism project, which was also funded by the AIIB, particularly with forced displacement of people and forced resettlement. And then more recently, there's been civil society organizations of alleged predatory and abusive collection practices with regard to microfinancing a project in Cambodia that the AIIB funded. So with all these projects, there seems to be a pattern emerging about a different style of governance as compared to, multilateral organizations, development banks like the World Bank. In all these cases, how can that kind of funding of those kinds of projects be consistent with the government's stated foreign policy priorities?
The AIIB has invested in 178 projects, and that's a project count that I have before we paused our work. And of course, over the last 6 months, we haven't been engaged in reviewing projects or participating in project approvals. I can't speak to the specifics of those projects, including whether or not they were considered at the AIIB before or after the pause that we've engaged in. But what I can say is that, as was presented by the testimony of Mr. Pickard, as the AIIB is a young institution, it's about 7 years old, one of the ways that it has been engaging in project investment decisions is by doing it alongside other more mature organizations like the World Bank or like the Asian Development Bank. And in fact, more than half of the projects that it invests in are done alongside those other institutions that have longer track records with respect to these issues.
Yeah, I've just enumerated 4 projects. 4 out of 178 is over 2%. It's not insignificant. It seems to fit into a model of what the Obama administration predicted, which was that this was going to be a sort of a strategy by the People's Republic of China to export its authoritarian model of governance throughout the throughout the Indo-Pacific region, and, seeing projects like this getting funded through a very different lens of human rights, protection for the environment, a very different lens of due process and procedural fairness for those communities affected, seems to me that, those predictions have come true. And so is the review that...
Sorry, Mr. Chong, your time has expired, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
All right.
Chair.